Let's look at the first one. Evolutionary dating methods. Every one of them is built upon evolutionary assumptions, and that is circular reasoning will show that. A fundamental fact about radiometric dating methods that makes them undependable is that they're built on unproven evolutionary assumptions. 3 major assumptions are listed by Andrew Snelling, who has his PhD in physics. Number 1, he says the original number of unstable atoms can be known. That's an assumption. Scientists assume how many parent atoms or unstable atoms existed at the beginning based on how many parents and daughter atoms are left today. Now, right away you can see, okay, they're going to work out, well, there's this many left today, and we think the world is so many millions of years old, so therefore there must have been this many parent atoms at the beginning. Can you see how they're using evolutionary assumptions? Number 2, the rate of change was constant. Scientists assume that radioactive atoms have changed at the same rate throughout time, ignoring the impact of creation or changes during Noah's flood. And something they're now talking about is with all the nuclear weapons testing that happened a few decades ago, none of that anymore, they tell us, but back several decades ago, you had both the U.S. and Soviet Union, and I don't know who else might have been doing it, and all this testing going on, that threw huge amounts of carbon into the air and completely throws off all the testing. So that's all stuff that has to be thought through. There's a lot of assumption there. Number 3, the daughter atoms were all produced by radioactive decay. Again, that's an assumption. Scientists assume that no outside forces, such as flowing groundwater, contaminated the sample. Scientists try to remove variables as best they can, but it's impossible for them to know conditions that existed in the distant past. Why? Because nobody was there. So the assumptions remain unproven. So the science remains uncertain. Only God was there to tell us, and he told us what happened in the Bible. But those who don't believe in God say, well, we'll rule him out. There's no one left to speak to us about what it was like all those years back. They assume that there was no 6-day creation a few thousand years ago and that there was no global flood. Thus, they make no attempt to understand how these events might have affected atomic elements and their decay. They say that their dating methods prove that there was no recent creation, but they base their methods on the assumption that there was no recent creation and tune their dating systems accordingly. That's what's called circular reasoning, and it doesn't hold up in a court of law. If you try to use circular reasoning, the barrister will pick you up on it immediately and say, that doesn't work. It proves nothing. So that's good to keep in mind. Now, we're going to give 2 examples of this. This first one comes from John Whitcomb's book, The World That Perished, and this example uses 2 assumptions. Number 1, the assumption of starting point or original condition, and 2, the assumption of a uniform rate of change from that starting point to the present. Consider a burning candle. You go into an abandoned house, and there is a candle, it's burning. And you measure it, you stand there for an hour, and you take your tape measure out, and you go, it's now this long. And then an hour later, you measure it, and it's 1 inch shorter, he said. Okay? Question. Someone says, now, how long has this candle been burning, and how long ago then was the house abandoned? Can you work that out? Well, no one can know until it can be shown how high the candle was when it was lit and whether the rate of burn has been constant. Question. How old is the earth? Answer. No one can know unless it can be proven what it was like when it began and how rapidly it has changed since then. Does that make sense? Let's give another example. The hourglass example. This comes from Ken Ham's book, The New Answers book. The following example shows how that radiometric dating relies on basic, unprovable assumptions. If we walk into a room and observe an hourglass with sand flowing from top to bottom, we could calculate how long ago the hourglass was turned over. We would need to estimate how fast the sand is falling and then measure the amount of sand at the bottom. But we could still be wrong because this formula is based on certain assumptions that might be incorrect. It assumes three things. First off, there was no sand at the bottom of the hourglass when it was first turned over. You know how you can, have you seen an hourglass? You know what we're talking about with those things, and you can flip them over. We've got an hourglass actually sitting under our missions presentation out there, and it is calculated to be exactly 1 hour. And you take that thing and you flip it over for a while, and then you flip it over, it's still got sand in the bottom. You didn't give it the full hour to empty out. So you walk into the room, you don't know whether what you're looking at was just, flipped over and moments ago happened, or whether they started it from zero. Secondly, no sand has been added or taken out. That's an assumption. And thirdly, the sand has been falling at the same rate. All of us have played games, probably, Boggle or whatever, and you've got this sand going down, and it just kind of gets stuck a little bit. And so people shake it and try to speed it up. Unless it's going to work against their team, then they just leave it alone. But that happens with cheaper hourglasses. Likewise, the evolutionist assumes that he knows the conditions that existed at the formation of rocks he is testing. He assumes a uniformitarian process since then, and other things he does not know, but that are necessary for accurate dating results. So let's understand that Noah's flood, for example, would have dramatically changed things. And though the earth was 1,656 years old when Noah's flood took place, they would, 1 year later, if you were there when Noah and the animals all came out and you wanted to go and test those things, the world would look dramatically different. So what we're looking at is, in this world, is dramatically changed by Noah's flood. Scientists do not believe in that when they take the evolutionary position, but the creation scientists do, and it's very important.